All right, y'all. So we're gonna have Jeff Luce come up, and we're basically talking about mental health and what to do. And oh, let's bring it down. Let's bring it down. We're going to talk about mental health, right? And I'm really excited about this sermon series because it really gives us a chance to really think about the issues that we prolong so often, right? Oftentimes, it's really hard for us to talk about these different difficult subjects, and so that's why we have an expert. So, without any further ado, I'd like to welcome Jeff Luce to the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Chemo. I'm really excited to be here, and I'll put this music back when I'm done, I promise. Thank you guys so much for having me today. Yes, so Chemo said he's very excited to have this sermon series, this talk about mental health. I'm sure there's a range of emotions about this topic, right? Maybe some other people are very excited to hear about mental health and to learn a little bit, and then some others of you maybe a little more tenuous or wondering what to expect. So I really have three goals for today. I want to provide you guys some good information, some education around mental health, maybe even a new perspective on some issues around depression. I would really like for you guys at the end of today to be a little more curious about your own mental health and curious about what it looks like to explore that a little more fully or further. And then I want to encourage you guys at the end about the challenges that you're facing as young people, as teenagers in today's world. So the first thing we're going to do, it's a list. So the lists are a little boring, but I've got plenty of pretty interesting stories. I want to give you guys just the symptoms of depression. So I want to give you guys that list so you can kind of get your heads in that space and understand what we're talking about. So if you're feeling any of these things, this would be an indicator that you might be suffering from depression or somewhere on that spectrum. So you feel constantly irritable, sad, or angry. Nothing seems fun anymore, even the things that you used to love. You just don't see the point in forcing yourself to do it. You feel bad about yourself, worthless, guilty, or maybe just wrong in some way. You sleep too much or not enough. You've turned to alcohol and drugs to try to change the way that you feel. Anything and everything makes you cry. You are extremely sensitive to criticism. You've gained or lost weight without really consciously trying to do it. You have trouble concentrating, thinking straight, remembering things, and your grades may be suffering from that. You're feeling helpless and hopeless. And then finally, a big one, if you're thinking about death and suicide. So that's obviously a big one. But these are the symptoms or the signs of depression. And again, if you're feeling these things, it's an indicator that you might be in that space. Obviously, with that last one, we're going to get into suicide more fully later today. But if that is you, you need to talk to somebody, okay? And I want to just put that out there right now. You need to talk to a caring adult, someone in your life that you feel like you can trust, and you need to do that immediately. But I want to start with a story here, okay? So about 18 years ago, there was this South African psychiatrist. His name was Derek Summerfield, and he happened to be in Cambodia. He was doing some research around the psychological effects. The way this was phrased cracked me up. He was doing some studies, and I get it. I'm a therapist, so like weird things crack me up. So I'll just put that out there. He was doing a study in Cambodia on the psychological effects of unexploded landmines. Okay, the psychological effects for people living in an area with unexploded landmines. Probably some psychological effects, right? Next step kind of situation, right? So at this point in history in Cambodia, this was a time when chemical antidepressants, so like drugs that would help treat depression, right, were coming into the market, were coming into Cambodia. The doctors, or the local doctors there, did not know much about these drugs, so they asked Summerfield, who was kind of this South African expert guy, he asked him to explain to them, like, what are you talking about? What are these antidepressants you're talking about? And so he explained. And when Summerfield finished, the local doctors there said, well, they didn't need these new chemicals. They already had antidepressants. They already had them. And obviously Summerfield was super confused by that, and he thought it was going to be some like Is it going to be some like crazy witch's brew, eye of a newt kind of like thing, right? Is it going to be some like, herbal thing, eat these 3 leaves? No. So he was super confused. They told him something quite different, though, than what he was expecting. The doctors told Summerfield this story about a farmer that they had treated. The farmer was working in rice paddies, right? These waterlogged rice farms. And one day he stepped on a landmine and his leg was blown off, so his leg was gone. So he was subsequently fitted with an artificial limb, an artificial leg, and in time he was able to go back to work, right? Obviously, that work was very painful to do. There's a lot of kind of physicality with that work, and he had an artificial limb. On top of the fact, hey, where'd you get your leg blown off? Oh, the rice paddy? Well, here's an artificial leg. Now go back to work. So he's back in this place that was, a very stressful, chaotic place for him. Ultimately, for this farmer, life became just extremely difficult, not only physically, but mentally, spiritually even. And they combined and made a force around him, basically made him got him to a point where he, in essence, wanted to stop living. And his friends and his neighbors circled around him at that point, and they had an idea. They pooled their resources, and they came up with an idea. They said, we need to get this guy a cow, okay? We need to get this guy working as a dairy farmer. They realized that this was a job that would be more appropriate physically for where he was at in his life. He could, once again, kind of contribute to the community. And they felt and he could also make a living, the living that he needed for him and his family. So the community came together and they bought him a cow. And in the years and months that followed, this profound depression that this guy had, it lifted, right? He kind of grew into a new space, a new place. And so those Cambodian doctors told this super expert Summerfield guy, you see, for this man here, the cow was the antidepressant, okay? So now we have a new treatment. So if you're ever feeling depressed, just tell your parents you need to get a cow and we'll call it a day. We'll call it good. We're going to get into what this story means, okay? So there's this book that I have really been digging into over the last year. It's a book called Lost Connections by this guy named Johann Hari. It's a really interesting book because it basically takes, it's taken everything that we being kind of the professional mental health industry, have assumed and known about depression. And it's really said, let's take a step back and let's only look at what the science says. What does the data say actually works for depression? And really what is really going on? For Hari, this guy, he's a journalist, but this is a guy who's been suffering from extreme depression his whole life. For more than 30 years, he's been in some form of treatment for depression. And part of his journey in writing this book was understanding himself more. And really for those past 30 years of his life where he's been in treatment, he had been told a primary story about his depression. And I want you guys to listen to this and think, is this the story, or is this kind of the framework that I've been given as well? So when he was a teenager, he went to his doctor, and he explained to the doctor that he felt just extremely distressed, and he was pouring out his emotions, and it was uncontrollable, and it was rough. And so the doctor, Hari says, the doctor told me a story. The doctor said that my depression is caused by a spontaneous lack of a chemical in the brain called serotonin. And I simply needed to take some drugs to get my serotonin back to a certain level, a normal level. And then later, 30 years later, he's talking to one of his nephews, and his nephew, kind of going through the same process that Hari had gone through decades earlier, his nephew said that he had gone to the doctor, gotten a recent diagnosis, except his doctor had told him that the problem was that his dopamine level was at the wrong level. So he needed to take this drug to get his dopamine level to the right level. So this is kind of the consistent decades-long story that Hari has heard, and many of us have heard, and really in my industry, in the field that I'm in, this is kind of the story. It's a brain chemistry problem, a brain kind of a drug-treated issue. Let me take a step back. I'm not like an anti-psychopharmacology or an anti-psychotropic medication drug guy. Not at all. Have their place completely. What I'm really interested in, though, is taking a step back and looking at what's really going on, right? What's going on underneath that might be causing some of these issues, causing some of these feelings. We're going to get into some of the stats about the epidemic levels that some of these issues are at, especially with young people. So the World Health Organization, obviously, that's a pretty official sounding thing. They're real. The WHO, it's a real thing. They're the leading medical body in the world. And in 2011, they said, mental health is produced socially. This is the WHO. The presence or absence of mental health is above all a social indicator and requires a social as well as individual solutions. We only really have the power to control ourselves, our individual solutions. We are part of a bigger community here at RPC, and so we have some social opportunity as well. So there is broad agreement among professionals and psychiatrists and scientists and so forth that there are basically 3 causes of depression and anxiety. And all 3 kind of play out to different degrees in different people. So biological, right? Genes, kind of chemistry makeup, that would be one. Psychological, which is kind of how you think about yourself. And then social, kind of the wider way that we all connect and live together and all of that. So those are the 3. It's always interesting to me, at least. Again, I have a weird sense of what's interesting. But the highest percentage they're putting on the kind of chemistry or biological side at this point is around 35%, right? So what makes up your kind of mental health, they're putting around that percentage range. Again, I mean, that's going to ebb and flow and change based on what the science tells us. But, so again, this guy, Johann Hari, he takes a step back, right? And he says, I want to look at just what does the data show? What is the science telling us about depression? And trust me, his book is intense. There is a lot of footnotes, a lot of like studies and stuff. But kind of to boil it all down, because I'm not going to like do a 4-hour thing with you guys today. To boil it down, he came up with basically 9 things that drive depression, okay? And the book he wrote is called Lost Connection. So he says the first 7 kind of roots or causes of depression are forms of disconnection, okay? Disconnection from other people, disconnection from meaningful work, disconnection from meaningful values, disconnection from the natural world, disconnection from a safe and secure childhood, disconnection from status or a place in your society, and finally, a disconnection from a future that makes sense to you. So a sense that I have a future, right? I'm going towards something. And then there are 2 biological that he cites and discusses and kind of provides some science around too. That's genetics, like, you know, what kind of hand were you dealt genetically, and then kind of the brain chemistry and brain changes that happen in people. So again, these 9 kind of roots or causes of depression. So again, I'm a therapist. Kimo mentioned that. I've been working with, I worked for a long time in group home settings in Atlanta. So I worked with a lot of kids who are in foster care, and there's these group homes kind of all around the city of maybe 15 to 40 kids, and I did a lot of work and therapy work in different settings like that. It's great work. Right now I've got a practice. I work with men mostly, but kind of men along the spectrum of manhood, 13 to my oldest guy's around 70 right now, so that's kind of what I do right now. But when people come to me and they say, I'm struggling with these feelings of depression, these thoughts and all of that, I'm just going to tell you kind of my process, okay? So the first thing I do, and this is a hot tip about depression. I should have some sound effect for you guys because you're getting the hot tips. So the first thing we talk about sleep, and we talk about substance use, right? So the first one, super boring. Like, I can't believe I'm going to someone to pay me to, or I'm paying someone to like nag me about my sleep habits and patterns. But those are the first 2 things I look at. If you're not getting the appropriate sleep that you need, and we're going to get to some stats around that for you guys in a minute. If you're not getting that, it's going to be bad for your mental health. And then secondly, like, first, I'm very frank with the people I work with. You got to stop drinking. You got to stop doing drugs. Once you do that, see what happens, right? See if the depression subsides, and that might be driving a lot of it. If it doesn't, we've kind of eliminated that as a variable. We've pushed that off the table. And then at that point, we can actually get into what's really going on with you. So that's the process. But ultimately, with the guys I work with especially, the questions that I immediately try to get in as quickly with them as possible is, I know you're coming in because you're feeling depressed and lethargic and all of those things, but like, let's talk about your job, right? Are you in a job that is just absolutely killing you and sucking the life out of you and destroying you? Like, if so, let's have that conversation and get into it. Is this about a broken relationship that you need to work on and kind of mend and fix? Is that really what's driving this? Is that what's under it? Is it possible that you might just be doing way too much in your life and you're like burning out every possible thing you could burn out in your life? Could it be that? Or, for a lot of the people I work with, maybe it's time to actually talk about what happened, when you were 10, when you were 13, when you were 15, and get that out on the table, work through it so you can move forward in your adult life. So that's kind of my process. But for you guys, where you're at today, some kind of meaning, kind of under the surface questions I would pose to you guys, or I would ask you guys. So I want you guys to be thinking and asking yourself these questions right now. Am I meaningfully connected to people that love me and care about me unconditionally? So are you? Are you meaningfully connected in that way? Am I able to find my work or my school meaningful as part of my bigger story? Or even is that the place that I can go to where I'm connected meaningfully to others? I think it's important to ask yourself, am I connected to my values, my core ethics? Am I living the way that I want to be living? Am I connected spiritually? Am I grounded spiritually? The whole chapter on the disconnection from the natural world in that book is fascinating. In the science, they talk about what it means to be outside and all that. And I know that's kind of going away with the technology and all that stuff. But to ask yourself, am I missing something about connecting to the natural world? And I haven't been to Rutledge, but is it true you guys sleep outside in hammocks? Okay. All right. That sounds like miserable and painful. Like I can't be in a hammock for more than 5 minutes, but that's amazing. So you guys are going to be very connected to nature. When it comes to this question of childhood trauma and stuff, right? You guys are still kind of in those adolescent, teenage years. But if you've gone through something that's significant and serious, I don't know. I don't know what's gone on with you or whatever, but it may not be the time that you want to deal with it. There will come a point in your life that you will want to process, deal with, and work through those things for sure. Asking yourself the question, do I matter in my broader community? Am I connected here at RPC in ryeX? Am I a part of this community? I think that's a really great question. And then asking yourself finally, does my future make sense? Does it make sense to me? Am I able to see a future for myself? So those are some of the questions I would kind of pose to you. All right, how many hours of sleep does an average teenager get these days? 7 to 8? 7? 5. We got a 5, we got a 5, we got a 5. 8 or more on the weekends. We got a weekend sleeper over here. All right, all right. All right. The data says it's actually 7 to 7.5 hours is what the average. So we got over here. All right. That's what the average teenager gets. All right. We got some 5-hour people, which is wow. It's horribly painful. What do scientists say an average teenager needs for sleep? 8, 10, 9 to 10, 8, 13. We got a 13-hour over here. All right. Holy cow, we got a 13. All right. The scientists say, and this is another one of those how the heck do you get this exact of a number, right? The actual number is 9.25. 9.25. Okay, on an average weeknight, or let's say, tell me a weeknight that had school the following day. Raise your hand if you've had 9.25 hours of sleep prior to a day at school in the last 3 years. We got one guy, we got two, we got three. Okay, we got a few. Maybe I should have narrowed it down a little bit. Okay. So what I'm getting at, this is an immediate intervention. Again, if you're feeling these feelings, this is something you can say, I'm going to experiment with this. I'm going to experiment with the value of rest, and I'm going to do whatever I have to do to get to this place. So there's this, therapists and a lot of psychologists and stuff, we love our scales, and we love our assessments and tests, and we love all that kind of stuff. There's this scale called the Hamilton Depression Rating Scale. It's a 17-item test, and it's administered by clinical people. A score of 0 means you are awesome, right? Chilling, no depression, just it's amazing. Life is perfect for you. A 52 would be the worst. You are in a very bad place, kind of on the brink of kind of suicidal behavior and all that kind of stuff. So 0 to 52. What they like to measure in this scale is the impact that interventions make, right? So we do this, and we're able to bring your score down on this scale, right? Make sense? Are you guys doing the Hamilton scale back there? Just kidding. Just kidding. No, you're good. You're good. So for psychotropic medication, so you go to your doctor, you score whatever on the Hamilton scale, they prescribe you this medication, you take the medication. The average number of score reduction you get is 1.8, okay? So you're going to drop, you're doing 1.8 points on the Hamilton scale better after taking psychotropic medication. I'm going to give you an over-under. You guys know over-under, right? Okay, number 6 is the number that your score decreases if you get appropriate sleep patterns going. Under 6 or over 6? Who's got the under? Who's got the over? Okay. Well, you're all wrong. The actual number is 6. So I was just tricking you guys. The actual number is 6. So do you see what I'm saying? If you get on medication, which a lot of people need, it's all good. Your score on average will decrease by 1.8. If you get on the right sleep patterns, your number is going to decrease by 6. You're going to have a major impact if you say, I'm actually going to listen and I'm going to take this seriously. Okay, end of rant about sleep. You guys are super happy about that. This next piece, so you guys have heard all the studies, and I'm sure you're somewhat talking about it at school. The epidemic level increases in depression, anxiety for teenagers. Who's heard about this, or you've picked it up in the ether, you've picked it up in the air, you've kind of heard this stuff, right? So since the 80s, which you guys weren't alive in, but 80s were awesome. The 80s were just awesome. Since the 80s, this is a wild stat because we keep seeing the increase in depression. It's just going up and up and up and up, right? I kind of want to do another over-under, but now you guys know my trick about over-under, so I'm not going to do it again. There has been a 500% increase in the prescription of antidepressants since the 80s. So a 500% increase, which from a logical perspective, you say well, sounds like depression's fixed then, right? We've medicated our way to a fixture of this issue, and we've just not gotten to that point. In fact, depression is increasing. We're at epidemic levels in many ways. In fact, it's on the rise in every age group, specifically for young adults and teens. It's going up and up. And then I got some funny things here. Depression rates vary a lot by state. So 2 guesses for the state with the lowest depression rate. Tennessee. North Dakota. Those are some. Wyoming. God, yes, Bill's got it. It's Hawaii, guys. Come on, Hawaii, right? We're Hawaii. Hawaii's the answer. Hawaii. It's awesome. It's great. Hawaii's great. Now you're not worried about the volcano. You're like so chill. You're eating poi. It is like amazing. So that's the state with the lowest. Interestingly, the answer is Hawaii. Interestingly, oh, I was like, what the heck is that? Oh, wow. The volcano's finally hitting. Okay. The state with the highest, interestingly, Rhode Island. Rhode Island. I would not have guessed. I would not. Rhode Island. Rhode Island in the house. Okay. All right. Yeah, I would like, and we'll try to do this a little more orderly. A couple, I'm going over here, Chemo, sorry. A couple ideas about why. Why do you guys think depression and anxiety are increasing for teenagers these days? Cell phone usage is one idea. Social media. Just stress, higher standards. These are all really good. So I would say busyness, lack of community, and yes, the frame I put on the social media stuff, and I'm like, I'm all in, I'm addicted, I love it, but I almost feel like it's like 1978 with cigarettes, and everybody knows it's bad, but like it hasn't come out that it's really bad yet. So everyone's just like smoking, and like we know this is bad, but like the experts aren't telling us like how bad, and they're not putting regulations and stuff around. I kind of feel like we're in that space with social media. We'll see what happens, right? I'm going to skip forward here. I'm just going to briefly mention. So I've thought a lot about this social media question. I'm like a heavy Instagram person, but I recently deleted it off my phone after thinking about it for a while. And it's great, right? I'm on there, and I would encourage you guys to just go through this activity. You don't have to do it right now, but at some point. I just like paid attention to what I was feeling as I was going through my Instagram feed, right? Oh, there's my cousin Brad, who I love, who's like the nicest person ever. Pause. Why the heck did he get to look like Brad Pitt and I didn't, right? It's like, that's like the pause question. Oh, there's I'm mostly on there with my family, so that's why I do it. Oh, there's my cousin Olivia. She is like the coolest, like the sweetest person, amazing musician. Pause. Well, why am I not as cool as my cousin Olivia? Right? And then scroll down a little bit, like, oh, there's Killer Mike, who I think is amazing and I love. Like, pause. Like, I really will never be as awesome as Killer Mike, will I? No, probably not. So it's like, right? You're scrolling through and it feels like, oh, good. But like, again, wait for the pause and listen to what you're actually feeling as you're going through your Instagram feed. So that's just a little, that's a fun Sunday afternoon activity for you guys. We'll give that to you. I'm going to read this quick paragraph, and we are going to move toward the end here. So there was an interview with this psychologist named Lisa DeMauer, and she was asked this question: why is depression and anxiety increasing more dramatically for teenage girls than for teenage boys? And the stats are pretty staggering. So why is that? So this psychologist specializing in teenage treatment, and she works a lot with girls, she says that there are other forces that are unique to girls, and I want you guys to hear this, especially you girls. One of those things is we have put so much on girls' plates and we've taken nothing off. Girls are now unbelievably good students, and this one hurt a little bit. They are yards ahead of boys. This is what the professional said. And she cites the fact that 70% of valedictorians these days are female. So this, I'm not just trying to be mean here. This is what she said. And yet, we expect girls to be agreeable and super helpful to all people around them. Also, we would like the girls to be adorable, if not kind of hot in their own way. This is what Lisa DeMauer is saying. This is what she's saying. We also need them to be friendly and to maintain good ties within their family. even when boys are operating at a high academic level, which I'm sure a lot of you guys are doing. They do not operate with the same sense that they've got to be gorgeous and they've got to always be kind to people around them. It's just a whole different set of expectations and pressures. I thought that was really interesting. So the American Psychological Association has cited some really staggering stats around suicide-related thoughts and behaviors. It's a 47% increase, and we can get into the details at some other point, between 2008 and 2017. So it's a pretty stark increase in this kind of behavior. I'm just going to go through a couple things on this, guys. Obviously, this is a super serious topic. It's not a topic that I'm afraid to talk about. I'm trained to talk about it. I've been talking about it for a long time. But I know there's a lot of like weirdness and stigma, and it's a scary topic, and I want to recognize that. There really is always another solution. I've worked with a lot of people who've been in really dark places and helped them find a way out. If you are feeling this way, you've got a lot of adults in this room, at your schools, your parents. You need to go and you need to say, I need help, and that's all you need to say. People will rally to support you. I also want you to know that having these thoughts and feelings, it does not make you a bad person. I'm going to tell you a quick story about that in a minute. If you are feeling uncontrollable in this way, you need to wait 24 hours before you do anything, and within those 24 hours, you need to talk to somebody. And if you can't control yourself, you need to make sure you're never alone, okay? Whenever I think about and talk about suicide, so I'm like a history nerd. I love history. Abraham Lincoln's my dude. I love that guy. And I've just like gone way deep with Abraham Lincoln. I think he's the coolest. He was our tallest president, 6'4", gifted storyteller, told a lot of jokes. He loved wrestling, so I like the idea of like adults loving wrestling. Like, Ed, let's wrestle, man. Like, I think that's awesome. He didn't have a middle name. He established Thanksgiving. And little known fact about one of our greatest presidents, he struggled with major depression. And at certain points in his life, he was on the brink of suicide. I don't know if you guys knew that. This is one of those things that like historians in the early 20th century kind of buried. And once they uncovered a lot of source material, they found this out. It started with when this woman he loved died, when he was 26. There are reports that he would just take his gun and he would just wander off into the woods by himself, kind of away from his friends. And they were all like petrified that he was going to the woods to kill himself. The villagers and his friends, their anxiety was so intense because they loved this guy. One guy, a school teacher, a friend of his named Mentor Graham, he said, like, yeah, Lincoln told me that he felt like committing suicide often. He would often say this to him. Really, though, what turned the tide for him was his friends mobilized around him to keep him safe and to help him to get to a new place. There's a report that at one point his friends took all the sharp objects out of Lincoln's house to keep him safe. Like his friends rallied around him in that way. He would write these poems that were really depression poems that really read more like suicide notes, which is pretty dark when you think about it. Ultimately, there was a few months during 1941 where, in essence, he committed himself to the care of this doctor, and this doctor kind of like oversaw just his whole life because he was in such a dark place. So that was kind of his early adult life. It was a dark time for him. But during his middle years, he turned from the question of whether he could live, like he was agonizing over this question of whether he could live, and he turned to the question of how can I live? Like, how would I live? Like, what would my life be like going forward? And so he kind of built bridges out from himself. He got engaged with his culture. He started investigating who he was and what was driving him, and some of the pain and trauma and things that he had to go through as a kid. He started to think about how he might change, and he had to come to terms with what he had to endure as a person. What will he have to go through in order to get to a new place? I am super inspired by this journey. I'm super inspired by this amazing person. I mean, he changed the course of our country, the world, like all of these things, despite having these deep and profound struggles. He came to a fork in the road, right? And he said, I'm going to choose to live. And then he spent the rest of his days figuring out how he was going to live. All right? So, last thing, I want to encourage you guys to do a few things or think about a few things. If you are struggling, it doesn't have to be like the most intense kind of suicide level stuff either. If you're struggling, reach out for help. Reach out. There's a lot of people here, group leaders, youth leaders, teachers, friends, reach out. If you've got a friend who is struggling, reach out to them. Talk to them. Listen. Just actively listen to see what's going on. If you feel like you're getting in over your head with your friend who's struggling, call an adult. Bring somebody in, Bring the village around to support. Second, I want to encourage you guys to get curious about your own mental health and about your state of mind. Ask yourself that question, how am I living? Like, what am I doing here? And is it the life that you're intending and wanting to be living? And then finally, think about what you want to know for next week and write it down, because we're going to get into the weeds a little more next week. So thank you guys so much. You've been super attentive, and I really appreciate that. Thank you.